so far, just to summarize what I've shared, is that the big distinction between a contractor and employee is the degree of control of the services that you have over how they're provided. The more control you have, the more someone is an employee. So a standard employee is, let's go with the front desk person. The front desk person is using all of the equipment of the business. They're coming there, they're coming in at 9, they're leaving at 5, they're sitting beside the phone, they can't go anywhere else during that time, and you're telling them exactly what to do. If someone calls and wants to book a session, this is our process, or, and everything is paid for by the studio or by the company. Whereas a contractor, the extreme example I've given has been a plumber or a videographer who's helping you in your business. Someone who completely operates something differently and is just offering those services to you in your business. You're outsourcing it to someone else who does it. So I explained the difference between control, and I also spoke about the difference between it not really mattering what you call people, but more so the way that the services are provided. And that even if a document is called an independent contractor agreement, if the substantive elements of that agreement are not in line with what a contractor is, you'll have a lot of problems down the road with that. And then lastly, so far I've just mentioned the risks of misclassification. And in addition to not doing the right thing and potentially taking advantage of employees or workers, the risk that you run is someone tattletales on you, and then an audit, then the bricks start to fall against you, and your business could get audited and you could be found to have to pay taxes and back taxes. So another question I'll always get, and this is about, let's talk about non-competes and non-solicitations. And just like saying that, my mouth sort of waters that I just want to take a sip of tea. So a classic thing that will happen to me is I'll have a call with studio owners who will say something like, hey, I've got a team and I've got someone who works 3 hours a week for me, and I want to make sure that there's a non-compete so they can't work anywhere else. Or I want to put in they can't start their own business, they can't take any of my clients, any of this stuff. Firstly, it's a very, very difficult provision to enforce. And this is like part of why I make these courses, is to teach clients a little bit about how the law practically works and how processes actually play out in real life and not in Suits. Although I don't know if Suits ever made an episode on non-competes and non-solicitations. They probably do way sexier stuff than that. But in reality, the way that it would work is, if you're a studio owner, you're going to try to enforce this non-compete provision against someone who works for you. So you're going to say, okay, well, you're not allowed to work at any other studios or within, 4 miles or 4 kilometers from here for a period of 2 years, and all of these things. Realistically, let's say you hire someone and you've hired them, they're working for you, and now you're trying to actually apply that provision. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to send them a letter that says, hey, we know that you started your own business, you've taken our clients, you signed this non-compete agreement. As such, we're going to enforce it, and these are the damages. Non-competes will always vary on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, the same as a contractor and employee will. And so what is that, it may not hold any water. And so often what I will tell clients is, okay, yeah, sure, you want this to apply, but in your jurisdiction, it would be very, very difficult to actually do that. So some will sort of have the kitchen sink model to legal agreements, where they're like, cool, I want it in anyways, and so we'll put it in. But when it comes to actually enforcing it, you can send someone a demand letter that says, hey, you agreed not that you wouldn't compete against us under these terms, but if they really, really want to put up a stink, and I would say the percentage of people don't, but if they decide to, they can challenge that, and they can say, hey, I spoke to a lawyer who did research about non-competes in our jurisdiction, and they won't apply. And that's just an example of something that realistically can happen and that I would prepare you for. So that's one thing to know about non-competes. They don't always work the way that you want them to. Secondly, the very idea of having a non-compete for a contractor is contradictory in itself. And the reason why is because the whole idea is that you're just outsourcing one part of your business to this person who runs their own business. Why should you be allowed to tell them that they're not allowed to work with other people? And just let that sit in. And I get the emotional part about being a fitness and wellness professional, that we don't want them to take our clients, and what we do is different, and we do it a different way, and all of these things. But Cool. If you want to have more control, call them an employee. And then the next thing is, and so just to summarize and close up that little part, having a contractor agreement with a non-compete provision, again, remember when I said it doesn't matter what you call the agreement, it matters about the substantive elements inside the agreement. A non-compete is an example of something more that you would have with an employee than a contractor. So even if it's called a contractor agreement, but you have a non-compete provision, it is possible that that would lend an argument that someone actually was an employee and work against you in the event you really wanted them to be a contractor. And then when it comes to non-competes and employment agreements, it's tricky because a lot of the times I'll see clients who the teams that they work with, they'll have a bunch of different employees, but everyone works 4 to 8 hours a week. And you just have to think, would the government want to restrict that person's ability to not earn money doing their profession if they're only working 4 to 8 hours a week for one business? How can you say, oh, well, we're not going to let you work for anyone else in the same way? The tip that I have about non-competes is that make them as specific as possible. For example, I had a client who was a cycling studio who also did weights in cycle class. So we set the non-compete to that. So not that, you cannot be a fitness professional, not that you cannot offer classes or whatever it is, but we chose something very, very specific and said, okay, you cannot offer cycling classes included with weights included in a 2-mile radius from where our studio is based. And that's something that you have a much better chance of that going because that person can still offer cycling classes. They can still offer weight classes. They can still do all the other things that they're doing, but the specific thing that you and your business does is not permitted. So the last thing that I just want to say about employment agreements is I'll often be asked by clients, okay, well, we've got an employee handbook. Why is it that we need an employment agreement? And the truth is that employment agreements are legally binding agreements. An employee handbook is a package of papers that you'll give to someone or an email attachment that you'll send that is not legally binding. And what I want for my clients is to have relationships that are legally binding, because when you have a relationship that's legally binding, you can hold people accountable. Accountable is the magic word here. You can hold people accountable to their word, to what they've agreed to. And in the event that someone is not doing something they said they were going to do, you are allowed to send them a screenshot of the agreement that you came to, or the signed employment agreement, and you're allowed to say something along the lines of, hey, well, we agreed to this, and we agreed to X, you are doing Y. As such, what do we have to do to improve this relationship? And then in the event that you want to terminate someone, it's so much clearer and easier for you to do that. So employment agreements are legally binding. It's a signed document, and you have certain rights and benefits that come with that. And just closing out this lecture on contractors and employees, the big thing to remember is that more than ever, jurisdiction plays a really, really important role in deciding whether or not someone can be a contractor or an employee. And I just say this because when we work with clients, we'll do specific research into the state or the province or wherever it is to let people know, well, traditionally, this is what your jurisdiction says about contractors and employees. As such, we would recommend the following. And it's just something that it's important to work with trusted professionals who understand the industry, but also who understand the specifics of what's going on in your state, wherever it is that you are located. So to summarize the contractor-employee conversation, it's always about degree of control, how much control you have. It'll always come down to the jurisdiction that you're in. It's always about it doesn't matter what you call the agreement or what you call the relationship. It matters how it's actually performed and what is in the agreement and the way that the services are actually performed. The other things to keep in mind is that having something like a non-compete could work against you if you're trying to have non-compete with a contractor, because that's more of an indication of an employee. And then lastly, employee agreements are very, very beneficial because they permit you to have legally binding agreements as opposed to an employee handbook where it's not written in the same context and frame of like, hey, these are the certain rights that will arise to us under our particular relationship. And so it's an area that I see a lot of fitness professionals and business owners a little bit tentative and scared about and just willing to make a snap decision right off the bat. Like, I just want them to be contractors. And for me, having gone through that experience of the audit and having been with a couple of clients when they receive complaints from workers who say, well, I want to file for unemployment now, and you were actually treating me like an employee this whole time, even though you called me like a contractor. For me, having been through all of that sticky and yucky stuff and seeing the negative impact it had on the effect of the business, it's just more important for me to reinforce this need to bring information towards the topic and share the relevant information. So I hope that you got something out of this lesson, and I hope that you'll be able to come of making the decision of classifying your employees or contractors from a place of confidence and trust.